Hello everybody, welcome to Primus, welcome to our program B for Belarus with our beloved, excited Vladimir Baranich. Volodya, hello.
Excited indeed, hello.
Right, Vlad is a country consultant, media analyst at Expat BY, and today our major theme is Belarusians, law-abiding people. Are they, and what rule of law looks like in Belarus, sounds like an act, and whether it is a norm for Belarusians or not. The information item that I would like you to start with is the fact that Lukashenko recently declared or announced that in the last 5 years, less than 5 years, 16 million violations of law were committed by Belarusians. 3.5 million Belarusians were sentenced to different fines for the violation of administrative law. What makes Belarusians so law-ignoring people? Because it does not look like we respect law.
Yes, it's the first question we shall again put and answer. What is the reason?
Yeah.
Police
avalanche of
police
law
detectives
violation.
usually ask what is the motivation of law violation. So first of all, let's remember that we live in a country which brand itself, like president was branding it and bragging actually about it, that we're the last dictatorship in Europe.
But in dictatorship, people are supposed to follow law, to abide by the law because they are afraid of punishment. And it does not look like that.
It has long been tested and concluded that abiding the law does not depend on severe punishment. It's rather the culture. The culture of civil culture, let's say the culture or just something going in generations, like take Germans, just Ordnung everywhere. And here it could be like, in English term would be called Disordnung. Yes, it's like disorder,
chaos.
And not chaos, but you see, in the country where there is a famous joke, like it is a country where half population was imprisoned or was spent time in prison, and another half of population is going to go there.
Right.
And like one was sitting and half of them were guarding them.
Right, but what makes Belarusians so... What is the nature of Belarusians' attitude to law? Because law in the Soviet Union was interpreted as something that communists and ruling elites used against people. They abused that law. They discriminated against the groups that they did not like. But in Belarus right now, what changed? Because look at this, like over 0.5% of all population were punished by different fines or were punished for a violation of administrative code or criminal code. And that makes Belarusians the cow for the budget. On the one hand, they pay fines, and fines are part of the budgetary planning. On the other hand, Lukashenko recently said that, well, that's just too much, because if you drive a car, there are cameras everywhere, the stupid rules, they have nothing to do with security on the roads. So essentially, law is done in the way that to milk people all the way. The government uses citizens as an additional source of revenues.
It's two sides of the same coin. The problem that when Lukashenko said about this too much law, maybe we'll see another extreme when police will be afraid to punish for what is violation of the law. Well, actually, we have to mention that, for example, in the United States, it would be maybe called misdemeanor, like felony and misdemeanor, because mostly we talk here about misdemeanor, which is administrative law, although we have a lot of criminal cases, but mostly we talk about administrative violation, which is usually fined.
80% of all these 3.5 million is about traffic fine.
I would say that police does its works very, very lazy. It is very, I would say, a lot of if you go everywhere, especially in traffic police, if you go anywhere in Minsk, anywhere, you see violations of this law everywhere. Cars parked on pavements, on lawns, and anywhere for people with disabilities, or people talking on mobile phones without, these devices like earphones or whatever, because it is forbidden by the law to talk directly on a smartphone. Or even, when many times I would see city bus drivers, they send messages on their smartphones while driving 100 passengers.
They believe they keep everything under control.
Well, but that's, this case, usually in such cases, I report to police because, I hate when they violate this law. I like, when law is being, I like a German order.
Right. German order needs independence of the judiciary, independence, checks and balances. And first of all, like in Scandinavian countries and Western countries, you see a clear way how a citizen can influence decision making, how you can control the drivers, police, policymakers. This is two-way street. While in Belarus, its authoritarian nature is that you can complain, but the same, and then as president and many people in the government admitted, if people send complaints to higher bodies like a presidential administration or state control committee, then their complaints are considered by the people who violated law.
That's the point.
Or ignore the law.
That's the point, because you can't demand law obedience by those who rule with disobeying this law. Actually, when you look at the list of violations by authorities of fundamental laws of the Constitution itself, we had it was before that, two programs ago, we had program about elections in Belarus, and I think we quite we considered that question, and we're quite exhaustive.
But that's constitutional law.
Yes.
We can say that. Well, this is it. Okay, Lukashenko doesn't want to give up power. He will stick to that no matter what. He is willing to pay any price. But here, he seems to defend people, said, okay, I'm sick and tired of road police, I'm sick and tired of bureaucrats, they build blocks, stumbling blocks everywhere people go, and why do we, as he argues, build good roads, very good roads, at the same time we have speed limits like 70, 80, 90 kilometers an hour, and it's so ridiculous. I went to Grodno recently, and a wonderful road, and at the same time, each time you have 120 kilometers an hour, which is okay, then it's 70, 80, and then the cameras flash, and here it is. You have to pay this stupid fine. They're called letters of happiness, pisma счастья.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's it's another.
So, Volodya, what's your take on this particular situation? Where is this chicken and egg story here? So, what is the root cause of this kind of attitude of police, customs, fire inspection, sanitation inspection? Is it because they have their fines planned by the government? So, the government is the root cause of all this kind of evil?
Yes and no, because on one side, yes, they have these plans. Actually, Belarus is probably the only country in the world where there are state-approved, beforehand approved plans for fines. I know tax police has their own plans for how many fines they shall get from milk from entrepreneurs or whatever. Mostly entrepreneurs, yes. And probably the same is in police, I'm not sure, but they have their plans, they have their premium payments for fulfilling that. And so it's, on one side, yes, it is state policy, and because of this bureaucracy, this Leviathan, it just works, Leviathan, it works, and just grinding everything in the pulp. But another thing is tradition, I would say, popular tradition, or what we call customs or culture. You see, during Soviet times, which go back to Stalin times, where a lot of population was imprisoned, and we have this culture of even subculture of prison subculture, I would call it. These prison songs are very popular among ordinary people, and this code of ethics, I would call it, because when I told it, like I like to report about violation, but most of my co-citizens would call me Stukach for that. Stukach is informer, one who informs. Snitch. Yes, and it's a bad manner. Considered.
It's immoral. People believe that this is unacceptable, and there are some rules in the tax code that if you suspect anybody to be to avoid paying taxes, then if you report and the tax inspection investigated this guy and stated that really he did not pay taxes, then you get like a certain premium, a certain fee for this snitching.
Not necessarily, no.
This is the norm in Belarus right now. In America, it's popular. If you report to somebody, then you get like 25% of this money.
No premium, nothing. No. In Belarus,
there is an envelope.
If there was financial incentive, I assure you, people would overcome any restriction by ethics, whatever, money.
There is financial incentive in the tax legislation that stated that if you report on somebody who you suspect not to pay taxes, then you get a certain premium. It's limited in the sum, so you cannot get like 25% as in America, but there is definitely clear financial incentive. But people are reluctant to use this particular norm.
I remember that on the other side, tax police also is reluctant to pay that amount, so they cheat on their side. Exactly. This violation of law goes everywhere. That's a problem. They violate. It's kind of, I don't know, this vicious circle, because I don't know who's going to break it. But definitely only through democracy and open society.
Right, and law enforcement, because in Belarus, I have the impression that laws are like guidelines, like wishes, like let's do something in this following. They are vague, they're not concrete enough, they can be interpreted many ways. That's why in Germany or United States, people take part in the discussion of different drafts. They are very active in making it as clear as possible, trying to analyze that and not to prevent laws from being ambiguous. But in Belarus, it's part of the game is to have this ambiguity, because then when it is enforced, when it is still not a draft resolution but enforced, it's a law, then it's about two people who interpret that. So if you're a friend of mine, then I treat you in this way. If you're an enemy or an opponent, I treat you in a different way. Yes. So this is kind of divergence or wide range of different opinions on the same legal clause is what makes Belarusian legislation, Belarusian law, a big black hole.
See, yes, you mentioned, United States and Germany. People there, they take part in working out this law system. They are subjects of the law. Yep. Here, people are objects of the law.
And they're stakeholders. They take part in that. Like
here, they are just law is being imposed on them here, and they are not part of the law. So they consider law as something alien, as something even dangerous, as something like a menace for them. And in many cases, laws are let's say, not very wise, and so people try to avoid them. There is a famous, used to be famous, for instance, in Soviet times, there was a famous saying, a joke, like law, like a pole. You can't jump over it, but you can go around it.
Right.
So this attitude is everywhere. It's very famous. I mean, it's very popular. This joke is very popular. It's like a motto. It's like a rule of behavior.
Actually, usually people in Belarus argue that only ignoring law or interpreting it in a different way is the only way to save people, save income from the stupidity of law, from its discriminatory character. So surprisingly, like there's great economy in Belarus is like 50% of GDP or a little bit probably less, right? You have smuggling, you have hard currency dealers. You remember when in times of inflation, devaluation. So we have different sorts of different schemes where people try to avoid paying taxes, avoid not following stupid laws, because laws are not for the people, by the people, but laws by nomenclatura for nomenclatura favorites in business and in force structure. So it's kind of a big gap between what people need and what kind of informal rules of interconnection or interaction between people are, and the formal law, which is kind of mostly ignored because people believe this is like, as you rightly said, czars, feudals gave us law before. Now president and some other eggheads came out with some different concept of law. That's why when we have election, when we have some different litigations, it's people tend like 95%, 99% probably of all cases against the government are decided in favor of the government or the government supported objects.
You mentioned custom violations like on the border. Remember that Belarus now is one of the biggest smugglers of
all sorts of goods,
sanctioned products, especially which Russia imposed self-sanctions on certain important like EU products from Poland. And Belarus having the open border, they just send thousands of trucks with that stuff, which Russian custom authorities or the other supervising authorities, they just dump them in junkyards and crashing with tractors. And then we remember there was a big scandal with those petrochemicals,
dissolvents and diluents.
Yes, which were sold under the regular fuel was sold under the guise of those solvents.
But that's the point. So there are clear beneficiaries of Belarusians not following law. There are clear beneficiaries of making law not clear, not transparent, not vague, because that's where how they monetize their status. People in so-called force structures and control bodies, they like it because if, for example, if you have a clause which says, okay, if you do not make enough efforts to make your enterprise profitable. So what kind of efforts are those? Nobody specified it in the law, but that's up to a controller, inspector to specify it. Or, like, for example, to improve, to facilitate, to modernize. These are like vague clauses that in legislation turn to the legislative justification of being stupid, being lazy, being kind of imitating the real process. Like today, for example, Lukashenko said, okay, the law stated that Belarusian GDP must go by 4% GDP by 4% to 2019. In 11 months, GDP grew by 1.1%. And if that is a law, right, so you must then fire those who
violate the law.
Broke it. But if it's not, it's like a guideline, direction, a wish list, well, that's a different story. So don't call it a law, budget law. We have a budget law, and like in January and February, you can say that, it takes the government 1 month to amend it. So why on earth do you go through the procedure of adopting the law in the parliament if you amend it anytime you want, just 1 month after it was adopted?
Yes, that's actually the another thing which we have to take into consideration, that presidential decree or orders, they're above any law, even they're above international laws which Belarus signed. Maybe very few people know, who listen us from abroad, that Belarus, by its laws, is not supposed to fulfill any international law, because any internal law is above that law, and above international agreement. So, like, president can write a decree, or what is called executive order would be like in the United States. It would be the equivalent of that, and it would rule over even constitution.
There's one thing that I want your take on the attempt to translate it into English, because it's a wonderful phenomenon that illustrates our attitude to law. It's called telephonogramma.
Yeah.
It's like telegram, which is like reasonable. Then telephonogramma it's like a telephone call that you get from an authority for tax inspection or the government or the executive council with a direct order to follow certain things. And it's like, please put down telephonogramma for your boss. And it is supposed to be an order, direct order from the government or from the authority, from any governmental body to follow this. And if you don't follow that, you can be punished. So why do still people believe this telephonogramma? Because it's Americans and people in the English-speaking world, they don't even understand, don't follow how it can be. How can it be like an order? And then getting a phone call from somebody is the same as getting a written order by the court.
Well, maybe it is, maybe Belarus is ahead of the whole world, was ahead of the whole world on e-government, instead of writing...
E-government does not means like, personification. Who you talk to, right? But here is like telephonogramma. I am Maria Ivanovna, secretary of the minister.
No, they know the voice there. It's like, they don't need computer recognition software. It's like, like e-signature. It's like they hear, oh, there is a big boss calling from where? Not necessarily big boss. There is somebody
from the big boss.
But they know the voice, where it comes from.
All right.
And sometimes they have special lines, for dedicated line, telephone lines, and so this with like government, let's say. It's like I don't know.
It's like Lukashenko was the first to initiate this post-truth reality where voters were promised everything they wanted in 1994, and in this case, telephonogramma is like this prequel of e-government, but in the form that you are supposed to know who you get a call from, and then you follow the rules. And like you are director of a school, right? And you get a telephonogramma from the district executive committee saying you must get 50 kids to attend hockey match because president or whoever plays in this hockey palace, so you must ensure attendance. And nobody dares challenge that because that's telephonogramma.
Well, it comes back to Stalin times, actually. So this is the old tradition.
No, but then in Stalin times, telephones were rare, and you can get like enumerated.
But there was, there's a reflex worked out, like like biological reflex. That if you get this telephonogramma, if you don't obey it, you're got shot or something like like.
But that was a long time ago. Nobody would shoot you if you just say, "Come on, give me an order."
Yes, but
written order, please.
The same servitude.
Because that's about responsibility.
Again, this is culture of servitude, the culture of comply not with the law but with the boss, with party, like there was party boss or some. Now they have this vertical of power, which which is presidential vertical of power. People are simply on one side they're afraid, on the other side they're ignorant. Sometimes many times when I talk to people about law, they simply don't know their rights, they don't know our obligations, and law is something very strange word for them. Law means for them is like criminal punishment or something. Law means punishment for them.
That's right. So
not because that law exists for their sake. As I said, they are objects of the law. They are not the subjects of the law.
But even if I talk to many lawyers and they go to court. Judges say they just distinguish between people who work for the government, work for government, state-owned state-owned enterprises and the private sector. So for them, the priority by definition, by default, is always state sector, period. So they believe this is like a first-rank citizens, and then the rest of the country, which dare work for themselves.
Good you mentioned judges and courts, because we don't have independent court system.
Of course not.
And how we can expect respect for the law when courts, which are the
fully dependent,
final and the utmost solution for this, they violate all the time. They when they turn this law on what side where there is another saying which I can translate it, which закон что дышло. The law is it's something like a cart. Wherever you turn it, there it goes.
Yeah, right.
So it's so we see the
drawbar.
Yes,
drawbar.
it's which in the cart.
The Russian word, Russian language metaphor.
Yes.
More like a drawbar. You push it and it goes the way you push it, right? But at the same time, the problem is that nobody's immune from this misinterpretation of law. Even if you are a big guy, a lot of money, like Mr. Chish was, he was very close to the Lukashenko family in the broad sense of the word, not in terms of relatives, and he believed that he was above that, a different category,
a side of law,
right? A side of law, parallel to law, and then suddenly the law turned against him, and this is it. So he is law. And today, Cato Institute published Human Freedom Index. Belarus ranks 92nd in that index, but there is a sub-index called Rule of Law, and Belarus, in the scale from 0 to 10, got 5.1. But the lowest we got is in procedural justice, 3.9. That means that the procedures are so bad that, for example, right now we have this Minzdrav gate, the healthcare corruption scheme is being considered in the court system, and one of the prosecutors relied on the evidence of one guy who said that back in 2006 he was bribed by one businessman, gave him like couple of thousands of dollars. But the problem is that the cafe did not exist that time. And if, let's say, the guy who was essentially he himself is a criminal because he falsified against the other person, because probably he wants to have a lesser sentence for himself. But in this case, the authorities take this kind of evidence for granted without any critical evaluation of that. So it means that you're a big guy or like a medium-sized enterprise, direct owner of business, and somebody who hates you or who has some stakes in your business can tell bad things about you, and or like you report to the prosecutor's office or you report to KGB or whatever, and then you have problems with your business because people in uniform, they almost by definition take that for granted and say, if somebody says that he bribed you or you gave this government official a bribe, then you're guilty.
Yes. So
and you go to court, and the court did not ignore or does not ignore such procedural stupidities and violations. It says, this is the true statement, and the whole accusation is based on that.
Well, that's very sad that one of the you mentioned this, that law here is retroactive, I would say, because it works on the past when there was no law about something, but they project it into present, and thus they make somebody guilty. And again, we talk here. These cases are the example of that we don't have independent court system, which like judge can be absolutely independent, impartial, and take in consideration all aspects, no matter who's there, who's bureaucrat, state, or ordinary citizen. So that's the general. I say this is general. It's a part of a general culture of disrespect for the law from the capital, like L or the, because law, again, as a tradition goes back to Soviet times, law is not a mean for social cement, so to say, social stability, but or like mutual agreement between citizens. That law is like, it's like
it's our
people just agree.
Everyday practice.
Yes,
this is what people practice every day.
It's an instrument of the government, of big government, let's say, to rule people with an iron fist.
One more thing that I would like your take on and your opinion, something that is distinctly different in America, in the Western world, and Belarus. It's the existence of the jury. In Belarus, we don't have jury as randomly selected court of individuals that form this jury, and that who essentially make a verdict, or they decide whether the person is guilty or not guilty. In Russia, it existed sometime. In some of the countries, it did not exist. But essentially, when you talk about the introduction of the jury, would you be in favor as a means to create some trust to the court system in our country?
Well, the United States is unique. In the United States there is a unique situation. They have this jury which goes back in tradition. I don't think, I'm not sure there is such tradition in Germany, let's say, or in other countries.
But like the jury is like, if you do, probably not some criminal cases, but some cases that are
I know.
about that's common sense. It requires common sense.
A lot of movies, Hollywood movies, are based on that, and it's incredible for us to know just how on earth they can watch this movie where everything is going on, no action, but the court procedure where juries and runaway jury and this.
Around Mikhalkov's movie 12, right?
Yeah.
When there's based on one American movie again, but the thing is that when the one Chechen boy was under trial, whether he murdered or did not murder, and the decision was the prosecutors and the government was very quick to decide, he was guilty, let's send him to jail. But then, step by step, that was obvious that he did not commit a crime. But in Minsk, there was no even discussion to introduce the jury, this institution, to make the judicial system fairer.
Remember, in Soviet times, they had those called two jury. Instead of jury, they had two assistants of the judge. I think now they dropped even this system. Only one judge does everything. I'm not sure how this looks now, but I remember in Soviet times there was Troika.
Yeah, Troika.
Goes back to, Stalin times where Troikas were executioners.
3 of them, right?
Yes, 3 of them. And now, but I remember until maybe recently we had judge and 2 assistants. They were called judge assistants, or they were called citizen,
whatever,
civic, something.
Representative of the society.
Yes.
But there is another extreme case when formally the judiciary is independent in Ukraine, but what judges began to do, they began to sell their verdicts to the highest bidder, and this is another perversion of the system. So no matter what you if you formally make the courts, the judiciary, the court system independent, then there's a danger of how judges can abuse that. So I think that one of the decisions would be to let people decide for themselves who can decide on their dispute resolution. The arbitrage should be much more popular in our country than the monopoly of the government on all the aspects of the legal system. What do you think?
Again, this is all the part of all Soviet heritage, of this closed society, authoritarianism, the general disrespect for the law from the capital. later, and general ignorance of the population. And again, the problem that population is not the subject of the law; they are object of the law, and including authorities, they are also object of the law. The law here is like some monster who rules by itself, like a doom, like something,
self-fulfilling curse.
Yeah, it's like force, evil force, evil side of the force.
Right.
It is there. You can influence it with proper words, proper deeds.
I always, when I have a discussion with lawyers, and economists and lawyers have a different perspective of what the situation is like, and they say, well, laws in our country are good. They are almost European, but the execution is so bad. So come on, guys, if you design laws and you do not understand how they will be implemented, you do not have people who would follow them, you do not have judges and prosecutors who would stick to the law without any subjective interpretation, these are not good laws.
Yeah, that's the point. You see, in Belarus, actually, the general culture, even in business, as I remember, many times I used to say that the major attitude toward business, or just in any relations between where money is involved or commodities, something like that, some goods are involved. It's like it would be in Russian in swear language, but it would be translated as like steal and cheat. So that's everywhere. I always remind my clients or those who come to consult to get consultation, or tourists coming here, just tell them, just remember this one rule, very important. Everywhere you go, you will be the object of this attitude, steal and cheat. Or they will try to steal something.
First, they should lure you into some schemes, and then, like they say, well, it's so easy to start a business here. It's like entering business is $1, but getting out of business is $100.
$100.
That's a different scheme.
Yeah, many times there are auctions for some for some building, huge building like old factory building, for say 1 ruble even. It's incredible how
nobody wants to buy that. There's an interesting case in Gomel. They, like this year, I believe, they sold a public toilet for like $15,000.
Yes.
And they say, what the price? How come? And it turned out this is the third time the authorities sold it, because the previous 2 times somebody bought it, but there's like a fine print conditions for if you buy it. Okay, so you must meet some investment conditions, and they're so stupid that it's impossible to meet them. So essentially, it was like, okay, you sell it for like $30,000, then you nationalize it. You sell it for $1,000, you nationalize it. It's a wonderful way to exploit gullible investors.
Actually, when we talk about business, it is very dangerous to get something from the state, which was owned by state. If you have a little part of some enterprise, which there was partially state enterprise, you can get all this, state can get all this stuff, they will have their inspections, and finally we have many such cases, they will rule over, and they will simply say, well, there were violations, and state get damages for this, so they will take over all this business.
Right, so let's conclude that the attitude of Belarusians toward law is defined or determined by history, by the nature of the government, which is authoritarian, by the nature by the attitude of the government toward themselves. They are excommunicated, they are ignored in the process of drafting laws and establishing legally binding norms. And at the end of the day, I would say that this attitude is driven and by common sense and the desire to kind of isolate themselves from the stupidity of law and the Leviathan. Would we agree with that?
Yes, I agree. People, again, this disrespect for the law is like reaction, I would say protective, natural and instinct, like biological reaction for that. So the people just simply try to isolate themselves from the law, which they consider as evil, and they try to go, not jump over it, as I said, but like a pole, they try to go around it.
Yeah, right. So this going
to
around...
avoid it. They try not to violate it, but they try to avoid the law.
But one thing which is very clear, no matter what laws we copy from the government, from the West, Germany or United States or wherever, it will not change our legal culture. It will not change the way we do business, because fundamentally, in order to come to the attitude toward law as Germans, Australians, British, Americans have, we must have property rights in the first place. Private property rights, first fences, and then when people understand why private property is beneficial to everybody, they will understand that bringing about justice, independence of the judiciary is beneficial to everybody, and the result beneficial to the country.
That's right, and also we have to have this open society with democracy, where people take part in decision making. Again, in decision making, I mean about laws themselves. Like when there is draft for the law, they take part and they discuss it, openly discuss it. Now they discuss it only, let's say, in opposition media outlets, which are labeled for being opposition. Being opposition is like a label where bad, you're like an agent of foreign entity countries, or something like that.
Okay, Vlad, thank you for your inputs, for your opinions on this, on the topic. Belarusians, are they law-abiding people, and the rule of law in Belarus, what it looks like. That was another program, B for Belarus. Stay with us. Vlad Baranich is counsel consultant, the person who runs Expat BY. Go there. A lot of interesting things. If you want to visit Belarus, if you want to understand it, explore it, this is the place for you to go. Stay with us. Talk to us and comment whatever you find interesting. Cheerio. Bye.
Goodbye.